unless you're a psychopath, everybody pretty much believes that their views are well founded and reasonable and correct. And that you need to know. You can't come from a position of you're an idiot and you're wrong if you want to change their view.
Welcome to the podcast Sandbox with Michael Hatch, where we playtest new ways to structure debate and discussion in an effort to develop new and better methods of communicating ideas. This episode was recorded on August 19th, 2015. This is the third uploaded, though second recorded, of our special episodes featuring Delta Allstars. Those are the top mind changers from Reddit's Changemyview subreddit. Today, we have Changemyview moderator and over 100 Delta earner GarnTeller today on the episode. So, we're going to combine both the classic Delta Allstar format, where we'll get to know GarnTeller and then go over one of his deltas, in this case, whether or not debating religion is a waste of time. And then in the discussion section, we will talk about one word, borrowing again from the Podcast Sandbox toolkit. And today's one word will be the word definition. So I think that's appropriate for the first version of one of those we'll be uploading. So this takes us deep into the bedrocks of semantics, existence, reality, perhaps even math itself, tying it all back into how that relates to changing minds. And well, this one goes a little bit out there, so, I can say GarnTeller's insights and his patience with my unnecessarily long-winded questions both excelled expectations. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get into it. We are live. It is Wednesday, August 19th, 2015. I'm Michael Hatch, and I'm here with Marc. And today we're doing another of the a CMV Delta Allstars for Reddit Changemyview. Marc accumulated, I think, was it over 108 Delta so far?
122, I believe.
122. Okay. So, and basically what that means to those who haven't listened is that on 122 occasions, users of Changemyview, whether they're the original poster or someone else commenting, have had their point of view changed right there and then on the ground, which is something a lot of us, can be tempted to think might be impossible, but really does happen. So that's a big part of why we're doing this, is to show how that happens and that it really does. So, and how, people can be more open-minded than these things. So, yeah, I'll go ahead and just toss it to you, Marc, and the idea, basically just let us know a little bit about yourself and you and Changemyview and all that.
Sure. Yeah. So I think I'm not a very typical Redditor. I'm older than most. I actually got into it because my teenage son was into Reddit, and he's like, "Hey, you got to check this out," and got me there. And at first it was kind of interesting, but I realized I was much more into creating content than just looking at other people's content. Right. So I was really drawn towards CMV, where it's more about having that dialogue and the interaction than just reading what other people are doing. So, and so, yeah, quickly it became a time suck / favorite place for me to go.
Totally.
And not that long after doing that. So that was probably about a year and a half ago. And then a few months in, I was asked if I wanted to be a mod and was flattered and became one.
Cool. Yeah, I actually had the same experience when they asked me. I was like, "This is my favorite subreddit," and they wanted me to mod, and I was like, "Yay!" So, all right, well, cool. And so, you're a fan, but also a big time participant, and so, and just anything that you brought kind of before you got onto Changemyview that you think might have informed or added to your capacity to get those deltas.
I think a lot of it has to do with being a parent. My dad is a college professor, or was a college professor, and I think there's a lot of our dinner table discussions were very much discussing the issues of the day and trying to see both sides of an issue and really not talk about who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, but it's like, okay, why do these people think this and those people think that, and thinking about the background. So it kind of as my kids were getting older and didn't need as much instruction. I think it was another way to kind of keep that love of teaching and discussion going.
Right on. Cool. So it's, just generally being open-minded helped you get there. So cool. Well, then that sort of takes us to the end of just the second part here. And so now what we're going to go into for the listeners, just to explain, is that we're going to go over one of Marc's threads where he earned several deltas, actually, not from the original poster, but from several other Redditors all at the same time. And I think roughly there's a 10-to-1 ratio on Reddit where it's lurkers versus people who will respond. So in a sense, you can almost imagine 10 times as many people out there somewhere might have had their view changed, or at least I'd like to think. So basically, he's just going to walk us through what it was like, well, I can start by reading OP's stance, and then maybe you can take it from there. Does that work?
Sure.
And then I can voice the other Redditors when that opportunity comes up. So I'm just going to open your link here. And we will include these links later on the website, just for our viewers' sake. And oh, was that link in the shared? Oh, here it is. Okay.
Okay.
So sorry, I had that open before and I just lost it. All right. So the date of this Change My View was 11 months ago, and it was posted by Sale, like a discount, SALE 202, 11 months ago, and here it is. So Sale 202, title, CMV, arguing about religion is a huge waste of time. All right, so his is pretty short here, so that's good, and I'll just read right through it. In the past 2 or 3, this is Sale 202 talking now. In the past 2 or 3 years, I've been in a few religious atheist arguments, and I end every one of them by saying there's no proof for anything regarding this topic. For me, arguing about religion and whether or not God exists is a huge waste of time. A Christian/Jew/Muslim believes in God. An atheist/agnostic believes there isn't a God. Nobody knows anything concrete. So what is the point of arguing and reading all these books about atheism? Why don't people just stick to their own beliefs and stop persuading others to become religious or atheist? Of all the people I've talked to on this topic, 100% of them stuck to their primary beliefs. Nobody said, oh, this guy has a point, now I'm an atheist. And there's a later edit. The answers were great. I got just what I was looking for. Thank you, people. I just wanted to add that I did put some things the wrong way. Atheists, agnostics have a disbelief in God, yes. And about the last sentence, I didn't mean that people have never converted after a debate. People whom I've talked to at least have never converted on the spot. Big difference. Research. That is the key. So that last edit, you, I guess, probably wouldn't have seen when you first came in. So now when you read that, something about that grabbed your attention. You wanted to be a part of this one. What was that?
Well, I think religion to me is always fascinating. I'm more of an agnostic myself, but it's like the fact that people can believe, I just find very, very compelling and it escapes me. And so that concept is interesting, but I've also studied a fair amount of religion and really think it's a fascinating topic with a lot of discussion, and it's a great thing to consider. I think it is part of the essential human condition to ponder these big questions.
Groovy. All right. So, and then just to clarify there for a second, when you say agnostic, is that, I know these definitions get played out around a little bit, but like agnostic atheist, or like on the 2x2 grid, belief, knowledge, with or without for belief and not?
Yep. Without belief, I don't really know. I'd like to know. But I have not yet felt enough proof on one side or the other to really believe one way or another.
Okay, so you lack a belief in any particular deity or deities, though.
Correct.
Okay, and I guess you just might dispute. In my understanding, that would categorize you as atheist, but again, these are just usages, so they can go either way. Yeah, definitional stuff, just whatever. So
exactly.
All right, cool. So, all right, picking of a nit aside, yeah, just I mean, run me through it.
So I think when you're thinking about responding to someone, part of it is really thinking about having the response fit the question. So you want to take a look and see, okay, if this is somebody who's presented a lot of data and has statistics about percentage of atheists and believers and statistics of how many people have converted, et cetera, that sort of thing, you'd better respond with data, or you're not going to change their view. That's the sort of approach they have. So in this case, though, it was more of a logical philosophical argument, and so then you knew that that sort of talking about emotion, talking about anecdotes, is more likely to be appealing to them than the hard data.
Okay, yeah, because I was reading through some of your top posts, and you seem to some of the better ones right at the end. There was one where you talked about someone was saying it's okay to cheat on your spouse as long as they don't know, or there's no consequences. A sort of kind of utilitarian argument. I wouldn't say it's purely utilitarian, but that was what OP was saying. And you came up with this thing where you're like, well, if a blind man drops $20 on the street and you see it, there's no way he's lost the money anyways. So if you take that, you've done him no harm because he'd already lost the money at that point. How is that any different? And yet that feels wrong. So that's sort of some of these analogies then, I guess, is where the sort of kung fu you're bringing in this situation.
Yep.
Because it's not like a solid fact per se. It's more philosophical.
Yeah, and certainly, and to me, a lot of those moral discussions are the interesting things, finding the analogies and the different ways of looking at a similar thing that shines some sort of light as, okay, what is right and wrong in this case, and what makes them different if they are.
Yeah, I think, and you appeal to, I'm trying to think of the term, but Dan Dennett, calls these little Lego blocks of building off of people's intuitions towards something. They might see, well, I guess it is okay to cheat on your spouse or whatever, but then they think about the $20 bill and it hits an intuition somehow, or they're like, oh shoot, now that gets me,
Yep.
So those little, I've seen many of your posts seem to have those cool little analogies, usually near the end. So there's something interesting about your approach here. Is that usually useful in most, do you think, or it does change depending?
I think where possible, it is easy, particularly when you're talking about a kind of emotionally charged thing like cheating, or some of the feminisms or transsexuality, or some of the big charged things, that if you can take the meat of the argument, abortion's another great one, and take it away from the hysterical side that everybody has very strong opinions, and put it at something. It's like, okay, yeah, but if you're saying this, by your logic, this is also true. Do you agree with this extension of what you said, when removed from the politics and the all the other elements?
So if we apply that rule across the board, categorical imperative, does it still work? That kind of thing.
Exactly.
All right. So, and then in looking at this thread, so you had to decide what to include and what not to include in your response. So you wanted to, keep it. You wanted it to be thorough, but with to trim all the fat off of it.
Exactly. Yeah. That you want to be concise, but not too concise. It's finding, because of course one of the challenges on Reddit is you need to have people actually read it. Right. So having it well organized, having bullet points or bold points, or that if the original poster has 10 bullet points that they've talked to, it helps to have 10 responses to each of those bullet points. So making sure it's organized in a way that's easy for the OP to respond to.
Yeah, you had that real elaborate one about whether or not the the United States is moving towards a fascist government, is what an OP was saying. That's their point of view. And then you had like 11 bullet points where you really, how long did that take you?
I don't know, probably 20 minutes or half hour. But also that's, to me, that's kind of fun, where, because I think he had referenced a signs of fascism. There was some reference he gave as to, here are 11 signs of fascism, and it took them out of context to say, yes, the United States is becoming fascist. And And so really that one called for a point-by-point response, but it meant I'm researching these, and it's not something I necessarily thought of before, but really going through each of those, it's like, okay, how can I refute this, and
Right.
is there data, et cetera.
Right on. Okay, well then maybe just we're leaving everyone on the edge of their seats here. They've heard the trailer, and OP's original posting arguing about religion is a huge waste of time. So your response to that, and you're making the case it's not a waste of time. Do you want to maybe just read it? And
Sure.
Cool.
Yeah. So I said, if you're a fundamentalist Christian, you believe that those who have not embraced Christ are doomed to burn in everlasting hellfire. The whole history of Christianity is one of evangelism, bringing people to the faith, whether through conversion or threat of death. Is it a waste of time to tell someone standing on a railroad tracks that a train is coming? Maybe they won't believe you, but many people would feel they have an obligation to try to save them. We're talking about a mistake that could last an eternity here. On the flip side, atheists look at religious folks doing the equivalent of Linus sitting in the pumpkin patch waiting for the great pumpkin on Halloween. They are foregoing living in the present and making the most of the only life they'll ever get because they believe in a silly, unfounded superstition. We're talking about throwing your life away here. These things matter. While no one is going to settle the dispute for everyone simply by arguing about it on Reddit, you can resolve the question for you personally, which could quite literally change your life and perhaps your afterlife. Seems pretty important to me.
Nice. And yeah, I couldn't agree with you more on that. Because it's interesting to me that the most important topics, religion and politics, are the two most taboo.
Exactly. Yeah. Because it is very personal, and it gets to your core beliefs, and I think there's a lot of research on changing views is difficult, particularly if it's something like that. That's because once you start changing one of those core beliefs, then your whole pyramided network of belief system, could start to unravel. Because okay, if my basic assumption here isn't right, if I'm not right that God exists and is looking over me, well, what does that mean for everything else that I've based my life on? So so it's very, very difficult for people to do, but it's in a lot of ways the most important. I mean, if you really are a strong atheist or a strong religious person, I mean, what could be more important than that? I mean, it's really really a big deal.
Totally. All right. Well, so in looking at where this thread went, right, you've got several deltas. So maybe just give us a little tour of, say, 2 or 3 of these and how they went down. I think some might have been instant, but were there any that maybe had an exchange, at least a little back and forth?
Yeah, let me find one. Let's see. So there's one that was fairly simple, really well put. I thought the same as the OP and never really saw the purpose in arguing religion, but these are definitely the mindsets I've encountered, and they make sense, I guess. So got that one. I'm trying to think. There's some here where it goes a little bit further.
There's one that goes deeper with Mashudo. Mashudo responds. He's got 7 points. Do you see that? It's right beneath that one guy, 54. So the one you just read, it's the next one down.
Oh, okay, hang on. I see Surge Fist.
Yeah, mash like mashed potatoes, and then UTO if you want to control F it. And just while you're scrolling to it, I'll go ahead and read his half.
Yep.
Okay, so this is Mashudo's first reply. He's quoting you now as to this point. It was a waste of time to tell someone standing on the railroad tracks. It was a waste of time to tell someone standing on the railroad tracks that a train is coming. Maybe they won't believe you, but many people would feel that they have an obligation to try and save them. We're talking about a mistake that would last an eternity here. So, and now Mashudo's talking, done quoting you. He says, except that it's like telling someone a train is coming, not because you have evidence of a train, but just, that you have faith that there is a train coming. And the person you are trying to tell has no evidence to the contrary either, but just has faith that there's no train coming. How can you even begin to argue faith versus faith when all either one has to go on is faith?
And I thought that was a great point that he raised there.
It is.
And it's true. And the difficulty is in this argument, I'm really trying to straddle both sides and embrace the argument from the atheist and the Christian side.
Yeah, you want to call them out for false equivalence, but you can't because you want to play them both.
Exactly.
Okay.
So my response is, how can you begin to argue faith versus faith when all one has to go on is faith? Is because if you believe it, then by definition you think it's true. To the Christian, there is no doubt that the train is coming. If the person remains there, he will die. They have seen enough proof, such as the holy train schedule, which says there's a train due, even though some dispute the validity of schedules, to believe that there is a clear and present danger. How can you not argue if that's what you believe?
I think holy train schedule is going to be the title of this episode.
Excellent.
All right. So then now Mashuda, now this is a short enough one, I think, that we can read through it. When I was on with Huad P the other day, we skipped a bunch, but I think this is short enough. So I'll read Mashuda's next one.
Okay.
Let's just clear and present danger. Okay. So in response to you in the clear present danger, okay, Mashuda's saying, okay, maybe I worded that sentence wrong. Let's say, for example, here that you believe the train is coming. To you, this is truth. I am on the track. I do not believe the train is coming. To me, this is truth. So yes, obviously, you want to tell me the truth, because if I ignore it, it will be harmful to me. But at the same time, I believe my truth. I know it to be true, just like you know your truth to be true. So nothing you can tell me will convince me because I already know what I believe to be true. How is this not a waste of time? Well, he's kind of defining himself into the, well, anyways, I'll keep reading. You can spend your whole life telling me that there is a train coming, and I'll spend my whole life refuting it because I know there is no train coming. At the end of the day, we accomplish nothing except wasting time trying to convince each other that our beliefs are correct. So like I said, I worded that wrong, got a bit off topic. Of course, you can argue, but that arguing is a total waste of time without evidence to back up your belief. And even more importantly, that evidence has to be evidence that the other party will accept. So now I think he ends up switching after another user. So I don't know if you loosen the mayonnaise jar here.
Well, exactly. and that is the fun / tricky part of Reddit, that, anyone can jump into the conversation that you're having. So, so another person did jump in, and I was probably working or who knows,
Yeah.
who and responded, and probably very similar to what I would have said is, the difference is it works. People are converted to various causes by the thousands every day. And the way you speak, it would seem nobody changes faith just because one seems more attractive than another, or other subjective factors. People got out of the train rails believing they were saved and will continue to do so in the future. Therefore, it is not a waste of time to argue with them. Evidence is important, but not necessarily to change one's view.
And that was user Lucifer_Hirsch, totally stealing your thunder. And Mashudo's final response, giving the Delta, I'll give you that one. Perhaps to me personally, it will always be a waste of a time without real hard evidence. But you are right. People clearly are converted all the time. So therefore, saying that it is always a waste of time is just not true. Perhaps if the question were more specific, sure. And so that's something we see a lot in Changemyview, where an OP will state their statement perhaps using too much of an absolute. Use words like always or never, or, and so in this case, he's conceding that it's not always a waste of time. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, and this is one where, because sometimes it does become a completely sort of silly semantic, where clearly the intent of the OP was that, in general, all Republicans are evil. It's like, okay, no, this one isn't. That's really not the point that they were trying to get at. That in general, they're that. This is, I think, though, one where it really is. It's that mind expanding thing that I think Mashudo was looking at it from their own point of view, and okay, and for them, it's a waste of time, but as Lucifer Hirsch brought in, it's like, there's many people. It's not just an outlier, but for many people, that conversion or view changing is entirely possible and is in fact fairly common. And so I I think this wasn't one of those technicality cases where the OP kind of got it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
It was the case of Mashudo thinking about things differently, which is great.
Mm-hmm. Right on. So going back over this, as it all built up to that delta, sort of what do you, anything else you would want to maybe just kind of walk through as far as the story of how that went?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really about that whole, you can see how Mashudo is starting to concede more points and thinking about things a little bit differently as it goes along, and that really is fairly typical that it takes a couple of comments before somebody really is willing to open up and change their view if it's something they feel fairly strongly about.
Right on. Okay, and then what you had said earlier, I'm forgetting whether or not we said this during the prep session or not, but there was that post you had earlier where it said, you're not going to change anyone's view unless you really understand their view. And do you feel like with all the machinery of logic and argument happening, that there is that sort of that is always there, that thing of making sure you've got their point of view right?
Well, yeah, I think so. And one of the key things in Changemyview is we have a number of rules, and one of them has to do with not being rude or hostile. And in fact, we just had a user today who was getting kind of upset about it, but and arguing about, well, was that really exactly rude, etc. But it's once you've gotten to a point where you're just arguing with somebody and you're fighting back and forth, you're not changing any views. It really is about that line from To Kill a Mockingbird about standing in somebody's shoes and seeing it from there. You need to understand where they're coming from, and that to everyone. I mean, unless you're a psychopath, everybody pretty much believes that their views are well-founded and reasonable and correct, and that you need to know you can't come from a position of you're an idiot and you're wrong if you want to change their view. You're like, okay, let's turn this big freighter slightly this way, and we're gonna have to make a gradual slow curve. We're not gonna be able to take a sharp jaunt and get your view changed immediately, particularly by saying, by dismissing their view or them.
Gotcha. Okay, well, we are about 15 minutes into this section, so maybe if you had any last thoughts about this particular thread, or if you wanted to go into any other threads, maybe take another 5 minutes with this and we'll go into the last part.
Sure.
Cool.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, I think this one, I think we're pretty covered with this one.
Groovy. All right, well, so I'm just going to pull up our little schedule here. And so now we've got some, for the viewer's sake, there's some interchangeable units we've been doing with the overall podcast sandbox. And among those include like the listen-only versions, which are the ones where I kind of just, whether I disagree or agree with someone, I just get out their full point of view with exactitude, but don't argue back. No tricks or nothing, and I have to be nice about it. And the other one is something where we talk about just one word. Words like deserve or faith or good or liberal, these big words that can be nexuses of confusion as much as they help sometimes. So what I think this is a good way actually to segue to off of what we were just talking about is, you were talking about understanding their point of view, and our word for today is going to be the word definition. And so to segue off of what you were saying about knowing their point of view, at what point do definitions come into your process of trying to really grok where they're coming from?
Oh, I think it's incredibly important. There's a couple of things. So first of all, Reddit is by nature has a lot of younger users. I think there are a lot of people who come into Changemyview really thinking that they have a very original new concept, and this just occurred to them, and it's like, wow, this is just so amazing and world changing, and it's great. I think that they want to come here and share it, but some of it gets to the fact that they don't really understand the subtleties of the definition of the word that they're looking at or talking about. And so, you start with that. Then you have
and just real quick, just to clarify again for the listeners, our word of the day is definition. So we're talking about a lot of when we do a word of the day, we're doing a big chunk of it is what is the definition of the word good or the word faith or the word free will or something. So they'll just hear definition about definitions. So it might get confusing, but hopefully that cleared it up. All right.
Cool. So knowing the definition, and that I mean, a lot of discussions end up being around things like feminism, and it's what is the definition of feminism, because we can't begin to argue about it until we are talking about the same thing. So it's trying to understand, again, from their context and maybe even going back to their user history, what is it that they think that they're talking about when they use words like this, or what their view really is versus what I guess to write a good CMV is actually a lot harder than it seems, I think, and to have the amount of precision to really define what that view is. Like you were referring to the one, United States is moving towards fascism. Okay, that was really all about definition, because
define fascism.
Exactly. And all of those elements that define fascism, still it's like, okay, you can take them out of context and yeah, you can say, sure, it qualifies, but that's not really the intent of the words. Similarly, we get a lot of homosexuality or transsexuality is a form of mental illness, and here, look, I grabbed this page out of the diagnostic manual and see it fits all of these things. It's like, well, no, it doesn't really. It's if you take it out of context and don't know what the definition of the words are, it can do that. So so the definition itself becomes just vitally important to understanding their view in the first place, helping them understand what their view really is, and really what, in half the cases, that the view that they're arguing isn't really what they're saying it is. That makes
All
sense.
right. So if I were now, I sometimes I get, maybe, I don't know if hung up is the right word, but someone will ask me, what is the definition of a fruit, right? What is a definition of a fruit? Well, there was a Supreme Court case some 100 years ago or something where the Supreme Court declared that a tomato was a fruit legally, right? And then you have basic biology where fruit is a part of a family or a phylum, or I'm going to guess a phylum, right? Of a suborder of plants, right? And, but for me to say, okay, there is a definition of fruit, I would still be hesitant to declare that is the definition, because I think they're artifacts of just usage over history, right? So it's not that a word is this, it's that humans use this to represent this during this period of time. Would you look at, when someone says, like, what is the definition of that? How do you sort of chew on that when you're looking at the fundamentals of really, like, the rock bottom base principles underneath language use?
Well, I think it's even more than what you said. It's not just, throughout history they've used it this way. It's the different people, your tomato example, people will still refer to it as a fruit and a vegetable in different scenarios. There's a lot of context is what also plays into what the definition of something really is. So, so it's not enough to just say, let's bring out the OED and find the specific definition of something. It's really for the purposes of this conversation, so the whole reverse racism, another very common topic there. It's like, okay, can a minority be racist and oppressive? And it's sort of really, to some degree, it becomes about the semantics and can you use the definition to determine, rather than really, okay, are the actions that these people doing reprehensible, or it I think discussions like that can sort of miss the point, because really, whether you define it that way or not, it's yeah, there are people, there are black people who are discriminating against white people in certain scenarios, and that's not good. There are white people who do it against black people, and that's not good. And really, whether you call it reverse discrimination or discrimination or whatever isn't as important, but it's more to argue semantics with people and almost dismiss the behaviors that are going on than to really understand it better.
There is I'm just going to do one of my guilty pleasures in podcasts is there's a church called the Israel United in Christ podcast. And their group is of the opinion that the true Israelites came from Africa over on slave ships and were robbed of that and came over here, and that you'll hear them overtly say that like the white people are the devil and are unredeemable. But it's very well produced, and they're like totally earnest about it. But it's an example of, what you might respond to someone, can a minority be racist? And what they're saying there is they're not saying the word racism can never apply to a minority. They're saying something, I think, to the effect of, if a minority makes a declaration where if you swapped out the words with white or vice versa, in their case, it would be defanged in its impact and therefore not racist because they are a minority, which is itself kind of a nuanced point, but delivered in a way that is using the word to do the job of what argument could have done. So sometimes I think people try and like stake their claim to a word in a new definition in a way that defines their argument into special powers. Like the word, if you could just get this word to mean I mean this, it comes with enough baggage or rocket fuel behind it that it can take me where I want to go. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sorry, tangent.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah, it's that co-opting powerful words and terms that if you say,
thank you,
you oppose racism, then if you hate white against black racism, that must mean that if there is black against white racism, that you're either a hypocrite or you have to oppose that equally. And it's like, well, that's again not the point. But yeah, but it's trying to get that association with that word.
Yeah. And, there are, so any given word like racism, right? Just going through the literature of the last 50 years, you can probably find hundreds of definitions. My favorite is one I think I read in one of Steven Pinker's books, which essentially says, I'm going to get this right. He says, all right. The case against bigotry or racism, I guess you could say, is the moral stance that condemns judging an individual according to the average traits of certain groups. I would say average traits or stereotypes about certain groups to which the individual belongs. Enlightened societies choose to ignore race, sex, and ethnicity in hiring, promotion, salary, et cetera, et cetera. So like, it's like racism comes down to like any individual applying some qualification to them because of something over which they have no control. Like, okay, that's a good definition of racism for me. Someone else is going to say racism is just thinking it, or
right. But also more, does it have to be the dominant element in society that is doing it? That it's black slaves in 1800 hated white people. I would suspect. But was it really racist? Because because there's that
every
power element as well.
Was a slave master.
Exactly. And so you have this, because there's that implied unequal power where it's the racism is partially being perpetrated by those in control against those not in control. So it's not just about the differences. It's about having the ability and the power or authority to abuse it as well.
So what are some other techniques or situations that would kind of maybe let's say someone's coming to this podcast and they're listening to you because, you put yourself in a position where right now in this time and place, you've got this fresh new medium, where you are one of the standouts that has gotten a significant number of deltas. And I think one of the things I'm hoping listeners will come for is to learn from people like you who've made it to that point of succeeding, what in terms of definitions and things in that area, in those semantics, what advice would you give about that? And we can do several of these. Just, I feel like that's useful.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the first, again, is to really think about how is the other person you're talking to defining that word. Don't just think about, well, racism is this. I know this to be the case. I learned this, etc. You have to think about other definitions that are out there, and accept the validity that, hey, based on their experience and what they've seen, that calling a tomato a vegetable is a perfectly valid thing, even though to you it's a fruit and will always be a fruit.
Right. So would you say another way of putting that is one of the critical elements of applying the principle of charity, and that for those who haven't heard that is the idea that before responding to someone's argument, you give it the most charitable, rational, reasonable interpretation of the argument possible. So you don't try and do anything tricky with their argument. You give them the most generous interpretation to, assume they're coming from a rational place, and then based on that assumption, try to do the best job of inferring from that what their definition they're operating with really is.
Yeah, absolutely. And even knowing that it's not just the charitable side, it's also just because the charitable side implies there's some sort of potential for ill meaning or something. But here it's just really making sure you're thinking about or question yourself and try to put yourself in their shoes before you respond. That, don't just look from your own perspective.
And now sometimes people will say, now we're just talking semantics. Now, sometimes semantics can really be constructive if you're doing it the right way. Other times you go off the cliff and you're talking past each other. What in your mind is the difference between useful and non-useful discussions of semantics?
I think with most discussion, it's a question. Actually, getting back to that belief versus non-belief discussion, it's like, are you moving towards a better understanding where we're going to meet a mutual, okay, yeah, I'm hearing you, you're hearing me, okay, now we're seeing what we're doing? Or is it just sort of silly, nitpicky kind of, I'm right and you're wrong, and we're not looking for understanding, we're looking for points? And that I think is really where it becomes. Are you holding tight to some sort of definition just to win?
Right. Okay. So an example of this, we could go back to what we were talking about before, where there was, we referred to the false equivalence of the application of faith in two different ways. So the one person saying, well, the atheist has faith, there is no God, and the theist has faith, there is a God. So now you just have faith equals faith. And I'd say that there's a genuine definitional problem there, because your average 99% of atheists, from my experience and sort of, first world internet discussions on this, tend to be, I lack a belief in God due to a lack of evidence, but not making the claim there's no God, right? Whereas the faithful person is making a positive claim as to there is a God. So they're doing a false equivalence of faith there, I guess. And with that example, with that definition swapping, how do you deal with that?
Well, I guess the question is it relevant? Can we reach a further understanding of whatever our end goal is using their definition, even if it's not strictly right, and not have this be a stumbling block? Or is this, if in the topic we had, we could get past that false equivalence and go forward because it really wasn't the most important part of the discussion. On the other hand, if our discussion if the CMV had been, it's the same thing to, that being an atheist requires just as much faith as being, or being agnostic requires as much faith as being Christian, then that's something where it really does matter how you're defining faith, and then it has to become a matter of semantics. You have to resolve what that is if you want to resolve the question.
Yeah. So like I was having a discussion with someone who was a deacon in training 2 nights ago, I think. No, I think it was last night. And we did a 1 word about faith, but I could tell 10 minutes in where he's coming from with his faith is, he had said the God of my childhood as an Episcopalian is not the same conception as the God of me after 50, right? Because he kind of was religious as a child, went atheist, and then later in life became religious again, back to Episcopalian. And in his mind, his conception was sort of baroque and nebulous and untouchable, and in that way, kind of there was a beauty to it, but a sort of monastic, somewhat, almost related to sort of this idea of a Buddhist monk or something, that this mature, sophisticated, but untouchable definition of God that you couldn't really pin down. I couldn't do it. So I think when you hit those words where people won't let you really pin it, like I want to take faith and just like have a grid and just be like, does it include confidence? Okay, trust, fidelity, like all these different things, and check the boxes that apply. And then there's like, whatever, 2 to the power of 8 different versions of how many definitions of faith there are. And then you just give faith sub 1623 is the one we're using here. I wonder if a system like that could prevent all this confusion, or do you think that's a lost cause?
I think faith in particular is so nebulous, and perhaps I think the 2 of us might not be programmed to truly understand it, because I, as much as I'd like to feel what it's like to be a believer, my brain doesn't go that way. I can't really understand, because it's not evidence-based. It's not really I have seen enough hard evidence to prove that God exists. It's that I have felt his presence, and that is what has convinced me of that. And that's a very different, that I think, as a more science approach, a scientific method kind of guy, I don't know how you get to that point. So I don't know that it's a checklist as much as just sort of there's some circuit in people with faith that I don't have, and it's sort of almost like my son has perfect pitch, and the way he tries to describe it, it's like I can't. This doesn't make sense to me.
Well, let me ask you this. Okay, like for instance, like for whatever reason, I just don't like onions. It tastes like something from under the sink that I'm eating, right? And I think I'm just missing out. Like I think I just didn't get that gene or whatever. And there's some facet of the human experience not available to me, which is onions and them tasting good. Like I think for whatever reason, I don't have access to that. So that's a deficiency, really. And do you think in you and I that perhaps we share this inability to really click with faith in that sense? Is it something we're missing? Is it a deficiency? And if so, I mean, not to say whether that deficiency is good or bad, but if I'm deficient in the thing that makes telomeres shorter, that's a good thing. But
yeah, it's a fantastic question. I think for years, the idea of having faith, to be able to sort of sit back and relax and know that there is a deity who's out there who's looking after you and taking care of you, and you're going to live forever in the afterlife with it. I mean, God, that feels, no pun intended, but that's a very comforting idea. And so I would think that people of faith are much more at ease with life and comfortable with it than I am. And so in that sense, it's deficiency.
I think you're right. Yeah.
But I could spend my life being stoned and have fewer worries and cares as well, but I don't choose to choose an illusion that, to me, since faith has not been proven, and I cannot have that, that would be false for me to feel that it's something I'm missing, because
You don't see
it
the
won't be
appeal
real
of
to
it.
me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I see the appeal. I don't see the mechanism to get there, or I don't see it being real as well. It's, I guess, more of a Matrix kind of thing, that it to me, it has only been proven to be an illusion so far. And if there truly is a God, I would love to be faithful and to have all the perks that come with that faith. But until such time as I somehow get there, then I don't feel it's a lacking. I feel it's an illusion.
Okay, so getting away from faith specifically, because we want to stick to make it's about words and about definitions.
Mm-hmm.
So when someone says, well, when a philosopher, right, or someone important is saying the definition of this word is X, right, and they're bringing a whole new definition to the table, which there's no shortage of examples of, what's your response to that?
You mean when they're redefining something, or they're coming up with a new concept and naming it?
Well, okay, so I think there's an XKCD comic around here somewhere where basically this guy's like, we've got 13 different systems of labeling for this particular field of, I don't know, chemical labeling in a biology lab or something, right? Mm-hmm. And he's like, we just need to put all these fields together in one big system. And then he looks at it and it's like, okay, great, now we have 14 systems. You know, like, you just made it more complex. So anyone who's drilled down through a lot of these thinkers in the last few hundred years, or going back to Aristotle or whatever, is going to notice that many times someone will try and sort of re-twist all of the definitions from the past and appeal to our intuitions on a base level almost to get us to like get on board with this new for sure definition of this word, right? And you see that happen. And I guess there are examples where people say it's improved things and examples where it's made things worse or more confusing. But is anything that comes to mind in that area of someone where you think has maybe succeeded or failed? It's a tough one on short notice, I know.
Yeah, well, kind of what I'm thinking about a little bit is, you know, I'm more on the science side than the philosophy side. But I think, for instance, you look at Howard Gardner's work on multiple intelligences. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and we're going away from the idea that there's IQ, but instead there's multiple. You know, there's the math intelligence and
Right.
social and interaction and physical and a bunch of those. You know, something like that, where you're really, by coming up with new definitions and new concepts, you're really changing the way people think about them. You
Right.
know, and there are things that those sorts of definitions, I think, certainly can be incredibly impactful.
Right. And so they can be a positive when they're really like cleaning house on the definition. It's like, okay, let's just do it this way, guys. And, you know, occasionally maybe even a Shakespeare sort of would, I can't think of an example, but basically take a word and give it this definition in a moment of storytelling or poetry without laying it out, but just using it in that way where you like totally get it. And then that becomes like the dominant definition.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I did one of my older Reddit posts where I was playing around with the Google Trends, where it tells you word usage in books over time for like the last 1,000 years. And up until like 1600 or something, to use the word breast would just mean like, you know, you'd think of a man in armor and just the breast area, like you don't think of it as boobs. And then at some point in the late 1800s, like the use of the word breast just jumps, you know? And I'm like, okay, that's when breast started to mean boobs and not just general chest area. But you can see where like this new dominant, like first fish on the land of its definition just takes over. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, the word gay is another great one where, that oh yes, the two gay boys were happy all day, and you're like, you know, when you're reading a book from 50 years ago.
Gay old time.
Oh yeah. You're like, wow, okay, Fred and Barney, I guess. Yeah, you know, so it is funny how some words can get completely co-opted that way.
And the complete failure of the attempt of a couple of the four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse to try and like, okay, so the gay movement had deliberately rebranded the word gay to apply to them. And so they tried to copy that model by making the word bright apply to like secular critical thinking atheisty type people. and it totally fell flat in its face. So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But you're not. So you're of the opinion that these are things that do change. Definitions aren't locked to words.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, now to take that an extra stretch, this is where I think it gets a little bit interesting. Is numbers. And I've become the idea appeals to me that math is a subset of semantics, because one is a word that has a reference to an idea. It's a definition, right? And I'm wondering if mathematics as the use of semantic units in a historical phenomenological context could be seen as non-axiomatic per se on the rock bottom level of the universe, which is inherently down to the tiniest level, ultimately kind of fuzzy, because there are no real actual separate objects. They are conceptions, Mm-hmm. Do you think this blurriness of history of definitions could apply to other things like that, like polygons and integers too, or even logical laws?
I guess maybe I'm not following you into it. I mean, of course, math is sort of universal, and regardless of where you are across literally the universe,
Mm-hmm.
there's going to be the same math system, that there's going to be a concept of pi, and there's going to be something to denote one, and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
While the semantics, I think we found even across Earth that there's certainly different ways of viewing things, and even different things that people choose to have words for or not have words for. Which
Hold on. I just got some really weird interference. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
All right, you just got clear. Cool. Sorry, that just got real scrambly for a sec, but go ahead.
Sorry, I'm not sure where I was.
You were saying that the mathematical principles you think we would find with alien civilizations or whatever, them using the same.
Exactly. While the semantics, I think, varies so much from even on Earth, from culture to culture, languages choose, and in fact the words they choose to use are different by civilization, and impact the overall. Well, whether it's the nature and outlook of the people influence the language, or the language influences the people. I think it's a lot more variable than the math, which is much more constant.
Well, okay, so you take a word like, math at its core, countability, right? Like counting is where you got to start, right?
Sure. Yep.
One coconut, two coconuts. So I don't know if you've seen Lawrence Krauss's lecture on a universe from nothing at the Arizona the Origins Institute at University of Arizona, I think it's called.
No, I haven't.
So basically, he was explaining during part of this that basically at the place in the universe that's the most vacuumy, right? Like the space between the two most distant galaxies, the furthest point, the Easter island of the universe, the furthest place from land or from matter, right? Mm-hmm. Even at that place, you would still see a soapy foam of these certain kind of particles that are popping into and out of existence at all times in sort of this blurry, mushy, staticky sort of state, right? So the boundaries that we kind of assign to objects as if they're separate are, although I'm being very nitpicky on this in any practical way, and this is not a useful thing practically, but at rock bottom in the universe, there aren't actually separate objects, because the more you get down into a tinier and tinier pixelation, you'll see that the lines start to all blur away.
Sure.
So in that sense, the idea of there being a countingness in the universe, like a 1 and then a 2, requires two separate objects. But there aren't separate objects in reality. Because in order to have separate objects, you'd have to have a nothingness between them, and nothingness is not an available state of reality. It's not something that occurs. So what I mean to say is that although you may have the emergent property of aliens using numbers and counting, much like you may find them using the wheel or suspension bridges, fundamentally, could these concepts still be semantic tools, the counting, and therefore the math built on it, rather than math being somehow built into the machinery of each tiniest tiny particle in the universe.
I think
I'm drilling down to the bottom of definitionalism here. So
yeah, to the subatomic level, literally. It's interesting, but I think still wherever you get to it, there's still any culture is going to need, from a practical point of view, to have a countingness.
And I think we would find it. I agree with you. I just think they're equally artificial at their own locations.
But the difference is that we will find similar math structures that independently every civilization that's advanced enough will come up with the same mathematical concepts, and whether one's base 10 and one's base 32 or what have you, but it's still you're going to have these core concepts. While from a semantic point of view, I don't think that you can say that even the languages on Earth are different, but you consider an alien intelligence, and there could be completely different ways of conceiving of communication and not have any similarities between what we call words. I'll try one more approach. I'm the guy out on a limb here. I'm like the weirdo right now. This is my pet theory. But it's also, I think, an interesting way to just drill into what definitions are for our concepts. So I'll try just a slightly different approach, but then I'll leave it at that, just because it is kind of a way out there. But okay, so there was an author, I forget his name, wrote a book called Chariots of the Gods, and he was drawing a connection where he looked at all these world cultures and he saw pyramids of similar sort of angular slopes and alignments all around the world. And he said there's no way they could all be that similar because these cultures hadn't talked to each other, therefore aliens, right? So, but, later information, we can make an educated determination that, these may have been invented separately at separate places because human being wanted to get up to the sky, the place of timelessness and stars. That's kind of a natural thing you could see emerging at different places at different times, up towards that thing that seems immortal. So how do you get up? Well, we don't have steel beams or advanced construction, so you have to use stone. And then stone only builds up at that certain angle, like you see at the pyramids of Giza. Otherwise, it gets too big, it starts to crumble. And then the alignments that match are all just matching to certain things that any agricultural civilization would need to know, just like Stonehenge, with certain parts of the year and cycles of planting and all that. So you've got these very similar phenomenon appearing all around the world, but pyramids weren't some fundamental thing that pre-existed or were embodied in the world. They're just something that these different human civilizations stumbled across and built on their own, right? So they built something complex all very similarly, but because it was just the natural way to end up going. But there was nothing pyramid-y built into the Earth before that. And so what I'm saying is math is the same way. Many alien civilizations may all come up with some kind of counting that's useful to then abstract upon and build these complex models that can model the universe. But at their core, that countingness is still this sort of uniquely independently found thing that's useful, but wasn't there pre-existent in the cosmos itself. Long walk around, I know. Yeah. See, but I think the difference is that the pyramids, etc., are ways of humans. I guess the physical laws of the universe help dictate what they would be. So in that sense, I see that commonality. But in the absence of any life, math still exists. That if it were a barren universe, math would still exist. The concepts are fundamentally inherent to the universe. That there are simply ways that math describes the universe in a way uniquely that unlike language, where you can use many different ways to describe the same thing, math is at its basis a simple, universal, unavoidable language, if you will.
Does a concept require a mind?
Hang on, there's somebody at my door, which is very odd. Can I pause for a sec?
Yes, it's the math police. I'm sure there should be a
Yeah,
mic.
that must be it. Sorry. Okay, that was extremely weird because there was nobody there.
All right. Well, I hope this isn't the episode that makes us famous.
Yes.
So does it? You were saying that if humans were the only intelligent life in the universe, gamma ray burst kills all human beings instantly, right? So does math survive the death of human minds? You were just saying that it's a concept, so can it exist in the absence of minds?
Now we have to define exist. To me, it's the framework or the scaffolding upon which everything is hung. The universe revolves around it. So you may not see the scaffolding. There might not be anybody there to say, "Hey, look, there's the way it works," but it's still there holding things up.
Like where though? Like where would it be? I mean, it's like a bunch of stuff doing stuff, like nebulas and Platoing around and lobbyists and all essentially one object. But like, where would the math be?
But I mean, your cells exist and they do all the things to keep you going, even though you're not conscious of them. It's the hidden clockwork of what's going on, or the.
Okay, so like a school of fish, right, only needs a very simple set of rules to create something quite beautiful. It has to have a rule that I cannot get more than 1 inch close to someone else, and I'm not allowed to get more than 4 inches away from something else. And then also, if I see a predator, I'm going to move, and others will move away from me based on those previous rules. And the first one to spot food is going to move and everyone will follow them, right? 4 simple rules, and suddenly you have very complex behavior emerging from a school of fish, right? Mm-hmm. So, or like the game of life back in old Windows 95. So you have a very simple set of rules that can result in very complex expressions. So perhaps there's something very simple that lives in the tiniest elemental particles in terms of rules and behaviors that's simple like that ends up in these complexities.
Well, I think it's even beyond that a circle is going to be proportionate to the square of the radius, regardless of whether anybody notices it.
But circles don't exist. Like, there are no circles in this universe. There are things that approximate circles, but there are no circles.
Okay. And you're not willing to concede that there are individual objects as well.
It appears to be the case. I could be wrong on this. It just.
Well, and it's actually interesting because this gets back to that definition thing, and
that's why we're playing here. So
exactly that.
Hopefully our listeners aren't shooting themselves in the head with this cavernous depths of definitionalism or semantics I'm driving us to. But carry on.
Well, and it's someone's right. I think I'd related this to you offline, talking with an anti-vax person, trying to come up with a way to argue with them, and she was entirely, well, you can't trust anything that the AMA or the CDC says because they're all in Big Pharma's pocket, and she was quoting all these Mercola and other anti-science people, and it's like, we can't have this discussion because we have no common language. There's no source either of us can cite. So I'm trying to think of where in this mathematical universe we can go to have this conversation.
Well, I think these are the extreme boundaries. Like, I think we like the smaller or bigger things get, the weirder they get. This is going off of, I think, Dawkins' TED Talks where he talk about middle world and all that. Mm-hmm. And I think we just might not be anywhere close to develop the methodology to think at these areas at the extremely large and extremely small. And so, we are splitting hairs here that may end up not mattering as far as curing cancer or anything. But I guess it's more interesting to explore, just to sort of draw down, take off the crown of the king of what definitions are, you know, and realize that they're big softy concepts and they're not, you know.
Oh yeah, it's very, very nebulous.
Yeah, but as far as talking the same language, could you make an organization of terms where you're like, okay, when I use the word, dangerous in terms of vaccines, it means this, but you're using a different definition of dangerous, so we'll just call that dangerous sub 2, and you're dangerous sub 3, and you're just like, if you were to clarify which versions you're using, you can move the pieces around better or something. Like just with total clarity, would that be achievable?
Well, in that case, it's less definition so much as authorities or facts that that's your real problem. That when you can't agree on what the facts are,
right.
And there's no impartial observations that you can both point to. Then because you can agree that safe means that no more than 10 people are killed for every 100,000 saved.
Mm-hmm.
We could both easily agree on that, but if we can't agree on and what does the data show about how many people are killed and how many people are saved, then we can't agree on whether something's safe.
So whether or not math is real, what might be more important is a system not to organize those extreme semantical points, but rather something to organize just the reliability of ideas.
And I think that's something we see a lot in politics these days, that we've gotten to the point where between the Fox News and the MSNBCs that facts or ideas are not reliable anymore, that we're not agreeing on those either. And I don't know how we have a debate, have a conversation as citizens or country when we can't agree what's going on, let alone what's the best path to get there.
Yeah. And so if you had your magic wand or $1 billion, what would you do?
Probably buy Fox and NBC and try to find myself a Walter Cronkite or someone to. But with the internet, I mean, there's so much cynicism and so much alternative information, which in some ways is great, but I don't know how you get back to credibility. I don't know how you find a mutually agreeable, respected source that you can say, okay, well, Walter Cronkite said that. You agree? You agree? Okay, yeah. So we really are in Vietnam with 50,000 troops. What should we do about it? Go,
yeah.
And then you can have that. Here, we're not even close to agreeing on what's really happening. And I don't know how what you do to there's been so much money made in the polarization and the distortion of facts. How do we get back to the case where people actually believe in an objective truth and want to hear it?
Well, I'd be remiss not to mention that I probably will find some excuse to bring this up in all of these podcasts, but there's a project I've sort of been trying to hone, and I did a failed Kickstarter on a few years back. It was right after their big, they had a big scandal in the news and someone blew all the money or something on one of those, but they were rejecting a lot more. And I had rushed this into production. And so the staff actually rejected this Kickstarter. So I've just been trying to refine it, and it's just been not complete yet. But basically the concept is to create some kind of comprehensive system where you've got kind of like an anti-Wikipedia of bad ideas, things we know for sure are wrong, like Earth-centric universe stuff, the very basics, and then grow from there and use some kind of Wikipedia sourced, crowdsourced, self-correcting system to blow that out. I mean, I feel like it's going to be an inevitable thing that comes out of the internet, and I feel like I just want to get to it first. But do you think that crowdsourcing this out in a Wikipedia way and applying a 1 to 10 scale for basic claims, truth claims of different kinds, could be manageable, doable with existing technology?
Yeah, it's a cool concept. I mean, it's certainly something we as a society could need and would be great to have. Um, the cynical part of me says, though, how do you keep the partisans from influencing the vote and make sure you guys all sign up and support whatever our candidate has said or our facts have said.
I guess I'd just learn everything I could about Wikipedia and how they did it, because they seem to have a nice self-correcting system there that's 20 years of experience now or something. But I feel like, I think the model they talked about was like benign dictatorship, so to speak, but it only works if there's other things like it, like there's multiple credit agencies, you would need multiple anti-Wikipedia type things like this that would then have confluence,
Well, you're right. Yeah, to have the that would make sense. Then could be able to bang them against each other, and yeah, certainly to incorporate some of the flagging users who clearly change things in the same direction multiple times. I mean, yeah, there's certainly a lot of stuff you can do there, and I forget what that ratio is they need to have on Wikipedia between good and bad people.
Like you actually need some bad just to keep like the immune system active.
Well, no, but just that you can survive a certain percentage of ill-meaning people. And
right, yeah. Well, I think if you I think the first thing you do is when you want to become a new user or a new editor, you make your own anti-Wikipedia page about yourself, right? So you put yourself up to criticism, and it has to be your real person in real life. So no anonymous internet on this. Like, it has to be a real person putting their own, right? So you can identify the person with one person. So you don't have multiple accounts. So if you can establish that, you can be a contributing user. And then it's just a matter of building up your credit rating over time of trustiness. And then the individual units of people would get filtered out naturally. I think it's I don't quite yet have the programming knowledge to put it together, but in concept, I'm still optimistic.
That's good. No, it certainly, if it could happen, would be very cool and very valuable.
Well, as long as the definitions were right.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is, we're getting right on 8 o'clock here my time, 10 o'clock your time. Are you getting close to thinking of wrapping up? Was there anything else you wanted to try and go over in this area of definitions?
Yeah, I probably have to wrap up in the next 15 minutes or so, but I think we covered a lot of territory.
Right on. Well,
the whole damn universe, man.
Well, an attempt to. Well, okay. Well, here's one more. Is irregardless a word?
Oh man. I would never use it. However, I acknowledge the fact that many people do use it, and it's sort of pedantic to say that a word that everybody knows the use of is
a unit of sound, and yeah.
Exactly. I mean, that certainly there's been this whole movement towards locking down language in the past century or something, and that the grammar Nazis steadfastly saying, this is not a word you cannot use, and if you use it, you're stupid. It's like, well, up until that point,
or worse than stupid, wrong.
Yeah.
Like, as if they're making a claim to a statement of fact. Like, that's not how definitions work.
Exactly. I mean, language is fluid, definitions change, and if you say irregardless, everybody's going to know what you mean. So, yeah, it's a word.
Woo! And well, admittedly, people can also play too fast and loose with that and just confuse things by using words completely outside the scope of human usage. So, just as a nod to the prescriptionists, yes, there is some value in language stability as well. So we're not completely confused. All right. Well, I feel like we're in a pretty good place. Any last words or anything else you want to go into?
No, I think this has been a very enjoyable conversation.
Right on, Marc. Well, Marc, I really appreciate your time, and I know it's later for you than it is me. So this has been great, and hopefully we'll, we can get you and a couple of the other Delta Allstars all together one of these days and talk about changing minds. So, but thank you very much for your time.
Oh, very cool. Glad to help.
Right on, man. Well, have a good night.
You too.
I'll catch you on Telegram tomorrow. Bye.
Okay.